Well, I was conceived on the 4th of July in 1932. Is that far enough back? Well, I don't know. English, I guess you start off by remembering what English was like when I was growing up during the Depression. Very, very different world then. And I remember, you know, when I was 3 playing out in the mud, making mud pies with Jean Meredith that lived next door to grandmother. You remember Jean Meredith?
Yeah.
Tried to eat mud pie, but it didn't taste too good, so I didn't do that anymore. And Mike and I would roam around the town, get in trouble, or take hikes up over the hill to Tony Cave.
Yeah.
Where's Tony Cave now? It must be pretty close to here, yeah?
Right down the road.
Down the road a little bit.
You know where all the big antiques are?
Yeah.
Right behind it.
Ah, so
Uncle Paul used to take us in there and we'd take a candle and
make
write her name
put
on
her
the
initials,
wall.
Put her initials on the
Tony
wall,
Cave.
yeah. And the English school, went to school. My mother took me to school, turned me loose, said, be nice to the teacher. My first grades, my first report card, I got a 69 in deportment. And people who knew what was going on looked at that and they said, oh, 69, so I thought that was pretty good. Turned out it wasn't pretty good. So I was kind of an imp. You guys remember Miss Blake, the music teacher? I was in touch with her in later years before she died. And one of the comments when she was in a newspaper article or something, so I wrote to her. And she was so happy to hear from somebody. And I said, you may remember me. I was a real imp. I caused you a lot of trouble. She said, no, I just remember you as an ordinary, active young child. But those are good years in the English school. The only other thing I've got to compare it with was when Dad was in the Navy and we went to school in Connecticut.
Groton.
Groton, Connecticut.
Yeah.
And that was different during the war because it was all female teachers and administrators and everything. It was a much larger school.
You remember our address? 59
59
Benham
Benham
Park.
Park, right.
Wasn't that something?
Do you remember our phone number in English?
No.
55 ring 3.
Okay, now I remember.
The office was 55 ring 2. And
What was Aunt Mary's number? Ring 4?
she didn't have one.
Oh,
No,
she
we
didn't?
were 55 ring 4.
We had a phone from our house
in the
to her.
bathroom, yeah, and there'd be a phone call, and we'd ring. It had a big, one of those big 6-volt batteries sitting there, a little toy
Yeah.
phone,
Okay.
and we'd call them up, and they'd come down to the
Yeah.
phone. Remember when we saw the roof on fire?
Yeah, absolutely. They didn't know it till we.
No, we went up to wake Dad up, ran up the stairs and looked out the window, and there was a fire blazing.
Coming out of the roof.
And we yelled, Uncle Paul's house is on fire, Uncle Paul's house is on fire. And Mother said, oh, be quiet, quit making so much noise. Dad changed that real quick. He said, call the operator, call Alberta. Not
What was
Alberta.
the last?
Verdi.
Bertie Austin. What was-
Verdi.
Bertie Austin.
Verdi.
Yeah,
What
that's
was
right.
her name?
V.
Alberta? Anyway. And
Verdi's
Bob
right.
Kilburn, meanwhile, was inside and got up on the counter and pushed open the access to the attic, and they were handing him buckets of water, and he was throwing water up underneath it. He pretty much had it under control by the time the fire department got there.
That was Bob that did that?
Yeah,
I
Bob
thought he
Kilburn.
was-
Uncle Paul was outside trying to get the ladder to straighten out so he could get up
I
on
see,
the roof,
okay.
and he was cussing the ladder because he couldn't make it work. All interesting memories.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of things that stick in your mind.
So you mentioned Groton, Connecticut. Is that where you were when the war ended?
Yeah.
That's right.
Dad was in the submarine service and stationed there at the sub base in Groton.
New London.
Well, it was called the New London sub base, but New London was actually on the other side,
Yeah.
and Groton was on this side. So we'd go swimming down in the Thames River.
Thames River,
They
that's right.
mispronounced it, the Thames River, and watch the subs. They'd be going out for deployment and coming back. but there was a low bridge that they had to get under in order to get to
Yeah.
the sub-base, so they'd have to blow their tanks and sink down in the water a little bit. And when they blew one of those tanks, boy, it resonated big explosion sound, really funny. But we'd go from the trailer park where we lived, we'd walk down the street and climb over some torpedoes. And you remember those torpedo cases that we'd
Yeah.
climb over?
And when the war ended, those subs would come up and da-da-da-da, wasn't that the V? Is that
Yeah,
the V for victory? Dot, dot,
I
dot,
guess.
dash?
I
They'd
don't-
go up and down the river. That was the day the war ended. They'd go up and down. That's what you heard
I
all
don't
day
rem-
long.
I don't remember that specifically.
Yeah, I do. Dot, 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 dash,
Yeah.
or V. Morse code,
And-
I guess.
On the radio, they'd play Beethoven's Beethoven's Fifth Symphony.
Fifth
Da 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 da.
Yeah.
Da da
Okay,
da.
yeah, they love that tempo.
Oh, here comes somebody. Hello, Karen. Carol and Donnie.
Got a seat, chair over here for Donnie and chairs for you two, wherever you'd like.
There's somebody else who
You guys
can
come right in here.
I'm gonna sit over here.
catch me in my lies.
Right in there, Donnie.
I was talking with Tim this morning. He was accusing me of maybe I'd stretched the truth a little bit here. I said, no, I won't tell any lies. I'll just avoid saying a lot of things
Lie by omission.
and hope everybody else does too.
So you've got 3 of your brothers here with you
Yeah.
today, and we're all in town for a niece's wedding.
Yeah, we had a lot of Flanagans all in one room yesterday, or the day before yesterday.
Now, were all of you born here in English? All of your siblings?
Technically, I was born in Paoli.
I think Mike and I were the only ones born in English.
Probably,
The girls were born in Paoli.
Paola, that's right.
And I don't know about the youngest 3 because I wasn't around then.
Paoli.
Paoli?
Yeah.
Little house on the corner was like a house hospital, and now it's a empty lot.
I spent some time there.
Yeah.
That's something that I don't remember too much. Mike is the one that has memories of that. But
I've lost all my memory.
you've lost it.
Yeah.
No, of the when the car hit me.
Huh?
You tell that all the time.
Well, it's true. I lose my memory from one day to the next.
No, but when you're talking about when I got hit by the car, well, you've got all kinds of things to say about it.
Some things I retain, that's correct.
And the interesting there must have been 50 people that were there that saw it because
Everybody got a different story.
everybody says, "Oh, I was right there. I was right there. I saw the car hit you." I don't think there was anybody there except Mike. But they all have memories.
What's your recollection, or what do you think the best composite story is of that event?
Well, you know how memories are. They renew and they change every time you renew them. But the best I can think was that I was aware off and on at a very, very low level that something was going on. I knew, it took me a while. I finally figured out what they were talking about was me. But for the most part, I was objective about it. I was just observing the sounds, and I was hearing people come in the house. They picked me up off the street, and Kenny Leckett's house was open. Nobody was there, but I opened it up, got some sheets out of the thing, and put them on the couch to keep the blood from getting on the couch. And I remember somebody saying to do that. So they must have been carrying me in during that time. And meanwhile, poor Mike is just being ignored.
I was in the first grade there.
He was in the first grade, and he just,
Went in there and I was crying, tears
Yeah.
coming down. And the teacher, Mildred Cummins, came down and patted me on the head. She knew why I was crying.
Well, back up a little bit, Granddad. So
Yep.
what happened? You and your older brother John were walking to school.
Walking to school, probably maybe holding hands before we got in front of Kenny and Francis' house. And John shook. I think he was trying to raced a car that was coming around the bend. Were you
This is
trying to
your
get
story.
across?
This is your story. I have no memory of that.
Yeah, because
whatever.
it knocked your memory out, and you let go of my hand and went running
Yeah.
across to beat that car, and the guy coming over the hill from the left is the one that hit you.
All I remember is that it was yellow.
I don't remember.
Yellow Model 8 Ford.
No, that kid that hit you it just tore him up.
Oh, I'm sure.
It really did, as it should.
As it should, yeah.
How old were you at the time?
8?
Maybe,
Yeah, 8.
I was probably 6.
Yeah. So then they put a crosswalk there,
After that, yeah, they put a sign down there,
right?
school kids
School
crossing,
kids crossing.
after it was too late.
Well, it may have saved somebody else from getting hit.
So that was walking from Sloan Avenue.
That was walking from Sloan Avenue area, right up. We always walked to school.
Which that house is no longer standing.
No, afraid not. Mark tore it down.
I was ordered to. I think Mike was the one that said, we need to tear that down before somebody gets in there and gets hurt. Sues
I
us."
don't remember that now, Mark.
I do. Yeah, we need to tear that down before somebody gets in there and gets hurt and sues us.
Well,
It was-
the neighbors
it was rough,
were,
though.
It was. It
the
was
neighbor
bad.
kid was doing that. The
Yeah.
neighbor kid was getting in there wandering around, and that was full of liability. So
So,
too bad we had to knock it down. It was a
I still
good
have
house.
part of it though,
Yes, you do. Several parts of it.
yeah.
Well, let's see. English high school. Got finished with that, and it was a pretty good school. I remember a lot of good times there, good experiences. A few bad experiences, but we won't talk about those. And then I wanted to go into the Air Force. I wanted to go into the Navy, and Dad wouldn't sign for me. Made me wait till I was 21. And a couple of friends of mine from Milltown, Ken McPhilia and Vern Willis, we went down to New Albany to join the Navy. And the Navy had a year-long waiting list. So we couldn't join the Navy, so went to the Air Force recruiter and he signed me right up. And Ken went into the Coast Guard, but Vern and I got into the Air Force. So then my life after that was pretty much in the Air Force, not very much associated with English or Crawford County, except when I would come home and leave. Went from the training to first station was at Campbell Air Base, at Chanute Air Force Base, where I took training in weather. My first assignment was at Fort Knox to support the Army down in Fort Knox. And then they sent me to Korea, spent there a year, supporting the Army there. Then they sent me to Germany, so I was supporting the Army there, because they always put the weather people where there was airplanes flying, and most of the aircraft that I was supporting were troop carriers. So we were supporting the troop carrier wing there. Spent 3 years, almost 3 years in Germany. Then came back and finally got into college. Got married, got some kids, getting ready to go on tenure with the local school system, and decided, that'll trap me here. If I ever want to go anyplace, if I get tenure, I'd be afraid to leave. So we started looking around, where should we go? We got a list of, I think there was 80 different places in the world where American teachers could get jobs, different places. One was American Samoa. We thought, oh, that sounds pretty exotic. And we wrote to them, and they said, no, we don't take anybody unless you have educational television experience. Oh, okay. So then we were looking at other places. And one day the principal called me out of my classroom and said, you got a call from Chicago. And it was the National Association of Educational Broadcasters that ran the program in Samoa. And he said, actually, we'd like to have you two guys. I guess they couldn't find math teachers with that experience. So they sent us up to Chicago for an interview, and we made our plans. Went down to American Samoa, took jobs. Ann was a TV teacher, and I was teaching in the high school the first year. In the second year, we developed a school that we referred to as the 13th year. They needed teachers, trained teachers, to take place of teachers in the classroom that were leaving. And usually the smart kids in the high school would get scholarships and go off to the mainland to college. So we would take the second group, the ones that weren't smart enough to get the scholarships, we'd take them and we'd train them to go into the classroom. And from that, we developed a community college that started the next year. So I taught there for the rest of the time I was there. And we had a place at Coconut Point, which Mark remembers. Tim remembers.
No, I was
Oh,
in
you
there.
weren't there at Coconut
No,
Point,
I
that's
never
right.
made it.
No, you weren't there. Mark was though.
What?
Coconut Point?
Well, not Coconut Point, but Samoa.
Not Coconut Point, that's right. We had to move out of there before. We lived there in a really, probably top 10 places in the world. It was 15 acres of coconut plantation right on a sandy beach with a square mile lagoon. Kids played in the sand. Their front yard was the water. And it was shallow enough for them to walk at high tide until they got out to where it was too deep, and there was no more sand. It was all rough coral, so they didn't walk on that. So it kind of automatic barrier. So they lived there 4.5 years, and they think of that as their home. It's like I think of English as my home, they think of that as their home. That's where they were there in their very formative years. It was a great time.
Didn't your parents come to visit you there?
Parents came to visit. Dad was reluctant. He didn't like traveling very much, but he came. We went out to eat one night at a Chinese restaurant, and they had an American menu. They had hamburgers on the menu, so that's what Dad ordered. We all ordered Chinese food. And our food came, and his food didn't come. He kept asking, so I asked the waiter what's going on. He said, well, our American cook isn't here. So, didn't know how to do a hamburger. I don't remember whether Dad ate anything or whether he ordered some Chinese food, but he pouted a lot. But yeah, that was pretty nice. And then we got kicked out of that gorgeous house because it belonged to a guy that used to be the governor, and he had leased it to the Samoa government to put employees in, and we had got into it that way. But then his son came back, and he wanted to live there, so they put him off for almost a year before they finally found a place for us to go. And I was in pretty good with the governor, so he was trying to keep us there as long as he could. But his wife had decided that her contribution to things was to create a museum. And in the museum, she wanted an aquarium. So she asked me to, I had aquarium at my house. So she asked me to do the aquarium for us. So we set up we probably had 20 tanks. There was a 6,000 gallon tank and a bunch of 300-gallon tanks and so on. We'd go out on a night dive and collect fish and bring them in, put them in. That was pretty nice. I had an aquarium in the TV studio, had an entranceway, and they wanted an aquarium there so they could put a video camera on it, and they would put that on when there was not, the TV system had lessons. The lessons were all piped out to all of the schools. All of the teaching was done on television. And in between classes, they had a blank screen. So they wanted that aquarium to be something that they could put on the screen. So I'd get fish to put in there. I got some of these little black and white fish that gather around coral. I'd feed them, and I'd tap on the tank to knock the food in, and they'd all come rushing. They learned what was going on, and when I tap on the tank, they'd come rushing up to feed. And one day I'd gone out and got a bunch more, about an equal number, and put them in. And the next morning when I tapped on the tank, the ones that had been there came up for the food, and the other ones ran away. So the next day, I was there when a couple of the cameramen were coming in. And I said, oh, look, I've trained these fish. Look what they can do. I said, now you guys, you go over here, and you guys will go over here. And I tapped on the tank, and they went like that. And the cameraman was convinced that I had trained them to do that. Scuba diving, got into scuba. There was a scuba instructor there who wanted to get enough people certified so that we could get a club and afford to have an air compressor because there was no source of air. The only way we could get air was to wait for the Pan Am to land and take the tanks out to the airplane, and their compressor could compress our tanks. And that, we couldn't get very many tanks that way. So he created a class, and we all got certified. And after a while, after a couple of years, he was ready to leave, and so he trained me to be an instructor. So from then I was a scuba instructor after that point. And that was an in with the governor too, because he'd always have visitors coming that would want to go scuba diving. So he'd ring me up and say, got the ambassador to New Zealand is coming through, and he wants to go see something. I had a deal with the hotel manager that we could use his pool to do the training, in return for which we would take his guests out if they wanted to go diving. And we didn't charge for it. He didn't charge us for the pool. I didn't charge for the training. It was all free. So I got to meet an awful lot of really interesting people there. Lord and Lady Bunting. Lord Bunting was the Queen's representative to Australia, who theoretically outranked the Prime Minister. And at one time, in fact, it wasn't Lord Bunting, but it was his replacement who actually fired the Prime Minister. I don't know if you're up on Australian history, but that was kind of interesting. Lord Bunting was a very interesting guy. And I don't want to go through all the notable people, but you can see the list there. There's just almost anybody who comes to Samoa is interesting in some respect. Margaret Mead may be the name that you'd be most likely to know. I got to spend an hour with her by myself in my office with the door closed because I had been picked to show her around the college. And she had just come in from New Guinea, and she had been around talking, making speeches, meeting the governor, all that kind of stuff. And led her into the school, introduced me. So I asked her, and everybody left. And she was just standing there with me. And I said, what would you like to see? And she said, I'd like to see the softest chair you've got. She was probably early 70s at that point. And I happened to have a big overstuffed chair in my office, so I led her in there, and she sat down. And we sat there and talked for an hour. And we finally heard some noise outside and opened the door and went in. And they were looking for her. They had come back to look for her, and they didn't know where she was. So that was cool. Oh, what else?
What about
What's that?
NASA, some of the space
Oh, the
shuttles?
astronaut, that was pretty cool. We happened to be in an area of the Pacific where a lot of the Apollo were collected. When they'd come down, they'd drop into the ocean. They'd pick them up and fly them into Pongo Pongo and get on a big airplane and fly them up to Honolulu. So we were there for Apollo 10. Apollo 10 went around the moon a few times, but it didn't land. And Apollo 11 landed there, but they didn't bring them to Pongo Pongo because they were afraid they might be infected with moon germs or something. So they kept them on the ship and took them up to Honolulu. Apollo 12 landed there. Apollo 13 wasn't supposed to, but something weird happened to Apollo 13, if you remember. And so they did end up landing there.
Houston, we have a problem.
What's that?
Houston, we have a problem.
Houston, we have a problem. And those guys came in on helicopters, landed, and they put a big stand up at the airport, and they'd come up and meet. That was just the way they greeted all the astronauts. And those three guys, you'd think they'd have something to say about surviving that ordeal. They were just mad because they didn't get to land on the moon. That was their main problem. Then we went ahead to Apollo 14 and then 17. 17 was the last one. And that's where I met one of Mike's friends. Because Apollo 17, NASA brought the senators and representatives that were on the committee that funded NASA. And so they brought them all to Honolulu, up to Pago Pago for the final thing. And Mike Gibbons, the manager at the hotel, called me up one day and he said, I've got a bunch of senators and congressmen down here that want to plan a dive. I said, okay, that's cool. Went down to his office and walked down. Here's this great big tall guy, and he stuck his hand out and said, hi, I'm Lowell. Had no idea who Lowell was. Turned out to be Senator Weicker. And so we
Who was on
arranged,
the Watergate Committee.
who was on the Watergate committee. Later, that was pre-Watergate,
Oh,
so didn't know who he was. So we planned a dive. We went out to the airport, and this was just at a time when it was beginning to get tight. The security around aircraft was getting kind of tight. And one of the I didn't want to take them into rough water at night, so there was a nice smooth place right across the runway that had breakwaters ahead of it, so it was a nice smooth place to go. So we went out, and normally we'd just go up there and tell the guard that we were going, that they'd say no aircraft coming in, so we'd just drive across the runway. We got up to the guard shack that night, about 6 cars, because we had, I think, a dozen senators and reps, plus each one was buddied with one of the club members. And he wouldn't let us through. He said, you have to get permission from the manager. So Weicker was sitting in the car with me. He said, well, let's see what the power of the U.S. Senate can do here. He was kind of joking. He's a 6'6" anyway, big guy. So we all tripped up to the manager, and he came out with his friend of mine, and Weicker was up there explaining to him that they'd like to do a dive there. Well, poor Marsden was looking here, and what am I going to do? I don't know who these people are. I don't know whether I should say. And he spotted me in the back. Oh, hi, John. What's going on? So I made my way through the group and talked to him. I said, oh, we got these visitors here from Washington that are here for the Apollo trip, and we'd just like to go out and do a dive. Oh, okay. So we walked back to the car, and Weicker said,
I need to stop you first. So.
okay.
All right, we're good.
Okay, well, we were at the point in the story where we were walking away from Marsden's office, having got permission to go across the runway, and Lowell turned to me and he said, well, so much for the power of the U.S. Senate. So we went out there and had a real nice dive, very, very comfortable, pleasant, everybody enjoyed it. And then they left. But one of the other aspects, we always had the ships, the recovery ships would come into Pago Pago Harbor waiting for the actual splashdown. They'd be there a couple of days usually. And one ship in particular had the job of maintaining contact with the vehicle that was circling the moon. And he in turn had contact with the people on the moon. So in order to talk to them, they had to transmit down to the ship and back up to the moon. So if the guy on the surface of the moon wanted to talk to the guy in the orbiting thing, he had to talk through the ship that was down there in Pago Pago Harbor. So they had this huge antenna. It was, I think it was 40, 50 feet wide, great big. It just dominated the entire ship. These guys also wanted to go scuba diving. And so in return for that, I got a tour of the ship and got in to see the radio system that was, the radio that they used required a very narrow bandwidth. I don't know how much radio you know, but every radio station, you can tune it off a little bit, and there's still some station there, tune it off the other way. Well, the radio they had, you couldn't tune it off at all. It had to be right on the nose. which required that they be very, very stable, so that any mass that was close to the radio would throw it off a little bit. So in order to make it work, they decided to increase a lot of mass around the radio, and what better to increase mass with than gold? So they built the radio out of gold. He pulled this shelf out, and here are these modules, 3 modules across, 5 down, and 2 shelves. Every module was about so by so, and it had a half-inch thick gold slab on all sides. So I calculated roughly they had pretty close to a cubic foot of gold there. And I said, boy, that is an expensive radio. He said, oh no, that's a cheap radio. We just borrowed the gold. They borrowed the gold from Fort Knox, and they're going to give it back after it was over. And that was my first encounter with a computer. That was, what, 1973 maybe, 2 or 3? And he had a game on the computer there, which is old stuff for anybody now, but it was a game of blackjack. So he fed a tape into the computer. The computer was about the size of a refrigerator. He fed the game in there, and it typed out, you know, place your bet. So I placed my bet, and it told me what the cards were, and asked if I wanted to hit, and so on. After a couple of hands, he told me, he said, try to cheat. So I went for 5 cards and busted, and asked, are you busted? Are you over 21? I said, no. And it said, I will not play with a cheat. You must leave the casino immediately. So that was my first emotional reaction to a computer. I felt like I'd been chastised. That was pretty cute. Oh, what else? Let's see. I've got a crib sheet here. Jeremy is putting me back to where I belong in English, talking about people and places and things. One of the things that we remember, that Mike remembers well too, is the English Publishing Company, the shop itself that we grew up in. It was originally over on the west side of Main Street, and I remember going in there occasionally, and the whole thing was powered by a single big motor up. Can you remember that?
Yeah.
Great big motor up close to the ceiling in the back with a kind of a axle going all the way across the back, and various pulley wheels. And the pulley would have a big belt on it that would come down and run the press, and this would have a big belt on it and come down and run the folder. This would have a big belt and come down and run the job press. And I can't remember, I don't know whether the linotype was run by one of those belts or not. But I remember as a kid, 3 years old maybe, standing there and watching these belts. And the belts had a connection where the ends were connected. And that was the only thing you could see when you're watching the belt. It's kind of blurry until one of those connections came down. So I could watch that and watch it go around the wheel, all the way back up and around the wheel. This one over here would be doing the same thing, but it would be at a different speed because the wheel was a different circumference. So one would be going faster than the other, and I would notice. And I blame that partially on my interest in mechanics and logic and science, watching the cause-effect relationship, watching the linotype machine, where things would fall and the cam would turn around and the second elevator would go down and bring it up, and something else would happen, and then something else. And it was also, this causes this and this causes this. I really think a lot of my scientific concepts were started by that experience. And then, was it 37 or 38? I don't remember when it was moved, when they built the new building across the street. But there was one big day, a lot of people standing around, and they were moving these great big heavy pieces of equipment across the street and putting them down in the new printing office. And after that, that's where we grew up from there on in that printing office. How much lead did we melt? How many lead fumes did we breathe? How much lead did we absorb into our skin? must have had some terrible health problems with us, right? We probably died young. I told my doctor that one time in Hawaii. I mentioned to him that we had had all that experience. He said, "Oh, we have a test for lead. Let's see if you got any lead in you." And he gave me the. I got no lead in me. So I suppose you probably don't have either. You lasted longer there than I did, though. So maybe you do have some. Oh, I remember some old names here. Guy Longest grain mill over across the railroad tracks. We could go in there and watch the grain when they'd fill up a bag of grain. It would come from upstairs and go down into the bag and fill the bag up. Julian, Dad took me over there one time and got Julian to show us the one lung generator. Do you remember that in the back?
Yeah.
It had a great big huge flywheel, and it would turn around and it would just go chunk and turn around a couple of times, chunk, 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 chunk. But I guess that powered the mill. I know at one time English had its own generating plant before they brought in outside electricity. But I don't think that was it. I doubt that one was big enough to do that. Dr. Frakes, Dr. Hammond, they had a spittoon in their office. That was the office right next to the old print shop. And you go in there, it was a very fine, dark area, great big brass spittoon in there, and these two doors, one to the law office and one
That's
to the...
Dr. Gobble, wasn't it?
No, Gobble had his office down by the
Oh, yeah,
post
you're
office.
right,
was.
okay.
I think it was Dr. Frakes was the
I think you're
dentist,
right, yeah.
and I think it was Felix Hammond who was a lawyer. It was anyway. So I remember that very well. And the bats, the canopy over the storefronts, and the one over Leo Land and the Luckett building. Bats lived up there, and all day long you could sit there and you could listen to them squeak. And then at night they'd come flying out.
Yeah.
I hated it when they tore that down. I thought, oh, poor bats. Oh, and Mike's bass, yeah. Mike was the fisherman. Dad took each of us out fishing every once in a while. He had a period of time there where he did a lot of fishing. And he took Mike out, and Mike caught a bass. You were what, 2, 3?
I don't know.
And they took a picture of him holding that bass up, and he sent it up to Outdoor Indiana, and they published the picture. So Mike was famous for a little while there. He did a lot of one-upping on me. And Dad himself caught he caught a 36-inch, was it?
Muskie. Muskellunge.
That was a big one, and he showed that off a lot, and the people up in Indianapolis didn't believe it. They didn't think there were any muskie in that little bitty creek. Suppose old Mose is still there. There was a
I don't know.
supposed to be a huge muskie that they call old Mose, and every tale that was told was more fancy than the previous tale.
Yeah.
People would talk about seeing him and all kinds of bait in his mouth and all hooks in his mouth. I don't know whether there's any credence to that or not. I never caught anything that deserved any remark, though. Oh, and the county nurse, what was her name? County nurse. I might think of it in a minute. But she'd come to the house to give us shots.
Bertha Dow.
Yeah,
What was that?
Bertha Dow.
Bertha Doubt, that's right. That was her name, Miss Doubt.
Very good, I remember that.
Very good, Donnie.
She's the origin of it.
Oh, okay.
I whispered in his ear.
So I got to the point where I did not enjoy seeing her come to the house, because I knew something bad was going to happen. But that was a good deal, going around to every house in the state and inoculating the kids. We need to do that now, I think, because an awful lot of kids. We're having a measles epidemic in Hawaii because people buy into this idiot notion that it's dangerous to take a measles vaccination. Dr. Novi's pink pills, oh yeah, you get sick, what are they gonna get? Get those pink pills in you. Got something wrong with your throat? Get Dr. Novi's throat medicine. I think it was just molasses, but it seemed to work. If you need to take castor oil, mix it up with orange juice. I got to the point for years I couldn't drink orange juice because I associated it with that castor oil. And oh, this was awful. You remember when they'd wrap us up in blankets to treat our sores?
No.
We'd get bit by bugs and they'd get infected, and we wouldn't sit still for them, so they wrap us up in a sheet, like you do a cat when you take it to the vet. And we'd lie there on the table screaming, and they'd paint us with mercurochrome or something. That's not a good memory either. Coal, yeah, one of my jobs anyway, I don't know if Mike had to do this, but take care of the coal. We had a coal furnace and a coal bin down in the basement and an opening to the outdoor, and the coal truck would come up and it would dump coal down in the coal bin. And you keep the door closed because there's all kinds of coal dust coming out there. And I didn't realize until many years later that we didn't have that door closed to keep us from breathing the coal dust. We had the door closed to keep the coal dust from exploding and blowing the house up. But I would go down in the morning and shovel the coal into the furnace to get the fire going again. And one day I got down in there, and here's this odd thing buried inside the coal. And I still have that. It's a fossilized cycad. It's a very nice.
What's a cycad?
It's kind of like a fern. You still see them today. They have a kind of a rough skin and then palm-like leaves that come out. It's still a ornamental cycadacea, but it's one of the very old plants. So I still got that. I'm happy with that. It's one of the few things I haven't lost. I've got a list of things that I've lost and wish I hadn't lost them. And that's one that I'm glad I didn't lose. Oh, what else we got? Bertie Austin, yeah. If there was a fire, because all the telephone system worked by lifting the receiver, and she'd answer, and you'd tell her who you wanted to call, and she'd plug it in, and you'd call. And if you had a fire, you called her up, and you'd say, there's a fire, and she'd punch the button, and the fire siren would go off, and everybody would call her and say, where's the fire? And she'd tell where everybody was. So and when they automated the telephone system, put her out of work, I was real disappointed. That was kind of I remember one time, Treva Johnson was telling me that she was trying to call somebody, and Bertie would say, they're not there, I just saw them walk down to the store. So she'd call back later. That was pretty nice.
Personalized service.
If you don't mind people knowing where you are.
She was the one person that knew everything going on.
She
in
knew
that village.
everything that was
Yeah.
going on in
Right.
town because it all went through her, and I wouldn't accuse her of listening in on a conversation, so she probably couldn't help it. Wyandotte Cave, yeah. We came about caving naturally because there were caves around us, but one time I had a friend that went to school in Milltown, but I don't remember just how it happened, but he had a job in the summer guiding at Wyandotte Cave. And he got me to go down there one time and do it. So for a while, I'd go down there on weekends and guide. And that was kind of fun. Ferris Mock was the primary guide. And Ferris one time I wasn't on this trip, thank goodness, but we had lanterns, gas lanterns. And everybody that went into the cave would be carrying this gas lantern. And this one time, they stopped, and Ferris was kind of long-winded. He had a spiel for every little thing. But this lady was standing right over this gas lantern, and it caught her dress on fire. And they had to put that out. And today, there would have been a big lawsuit over that, but I guess she was happy not to get burned too bad. And there was one place in there, Donnie, did you ever go in there to what we called the the Goblin's Roost.
Yes. Don't remember where it is now, but
Well, it was
I remember the name.
fairly early in the cave. It was not too far in, I remember. But I got the idea one time it'd be funny to hide in, because it was a place where you could hide in, and there's a little opening there. And we'd lead somebody, or somebody would be in there, and we'd lead somebody over there and say, that's a Goblin's Roost, and then whoever was in there would make a noise or say something and scare people to death. But, you know, that was dangerous. We could have had a heart attack or something and caused all kinds of trouble. I think Sam probably made us quit doing that. I don't remember the details of it. Sam Riley was the owner or manager of the place. Oh, Ben Wilkes, remember the Ben Wilkes show? Ben Wilkes would bring a big tent, and I guess it was part of the Chautauqua circuit. And they'd set it up down in the park and have a big show. I remember going to the shows a lot. I don't think I ever understood anything that was going on there, but it was quite popular. Oh, I don't know. Anybody motivated about anything that I haven't mentioned that ought to be?
Esox musculunge ohioensis. This is the Esox musculunge ohioensis is the subspecies that was in Little Blue.
Oh, okay.
And when they channelized Little Blue, that was the last breeding grounds on Earth.
Is that right?
That subspecies is gone from the planet.
Oh, well done, folks.
Yeah. Corps of Engineers was brought in to channelize that.
And they channelized it because they blamed that on the flood,
Yeah.
which is
didn't help. It
which is
flooded worse-
nonsense.
Flooded worse afterwards.
Because if there's 50 times more water than the channel can hold, by doubling the size of the channel, not going to help you much. Oh, dear me, I didn't know that. That's interesting, Mark. Thanks for telling me that. Thanks for making me feel bad.
Well, and Gene Cunningham used to catch a few. This was pre-1963, that's when it was channelized. You mentioned Gene a while ago. The guy that caught the state record caught it below English, right below English. His name was Jim Vineyard from Newburgh, Indiana.
What was the state record? Do you remember?
State record was 24 pounds.
24 pounds.
Yeah, it was
I don't remember Dad's. I don't know how heavy Dad's was. It was 36 inches, but it certainly wasn't 24 pounds. Probably 10, 12.
I have in my pocket a picture of one of the. I'll get to it here in a minute. It'll take another while, but a picture of one of the muskie from Little Blue.
Well,
It's just its head. But
that's really sad. That's too bad.
yeah, it is.
Well, I had this little list of how did we get to Hawaii. You've heard most of it, but when we went to Samoa the first time, we stayed there 5 years and decided we were never going to get our PhDs if we stayed there, so we'd have to go back and get a job on the mainland someplace where we could go back to school. We looked around, we wanted to stay in warm weather. We wanted to stay close to the ocean. So we toured around and we ended up down in Florida and we applied for jobs in Fort Lauderdale, close to Fort Lauderdale, the Nova school system. Without doing due process. We didn't do the examination of the schools around. We found there were no doctoral programs around that we were interested in. And so we ended up saying, well, we got along okay with master's degrees, that's good enough. And we were there for 4 years, and we got a message from a friend. I can't remember exactly now just how that happened, but it encouraged us to get back in touch with American Samoa. And they called us back and said, yeah, you want to come back? Yeah, we'd like to have you back. So we put it to the kids, said, would you like to go back to Samoa? And they just jumped up and down and said, yeah, let's go. So we applied and went back for another tour. And that time the college had moved to a different place and they had housing there at the college, so we had housing at the college. We were there at the college for 6 years. And again, we can't retire here. This is not the place for us to be. So a friend who had taught with us there had got a job at Oregon State, and he showed that there was a job opening there that he thought I would be interested in, and he sent it to me, and I sent in an application. They invited us to come for an interview, and they would pay our way from Samoa. Well, we didn't need to have them pay our way there because we were going to come back anyway. But in the meanwhile, the previous summer, I had been an adjunct professor at Hawaiiloa College up in Hawaii because the guy that I'd written some papers with had been teaching computer science there, and he had gone to Texas, and they needed somebody to stay there for the summer while they were renovating the computer center. So he got them to invite me up there, so I was there for a summer. And Oregon State wanted a more recent reference because I'd been in Samoa so long, I didn't have any references except there. So I stopped over there and went up to the college and asked the president there if he would write me a reference. And he said, well, yeah, I'll be happy to write you a reference, but if you're available, I'd like to have you here. So they pulled their committee together, called Ann in, interviewed the two of us, offered us jobs. Then we left and went to Oregon State with a job offer in Hawaii. And Oregon State then offered us both jobs. And we went to Bloomington and sat there with 2 jobs in hand. What do we want? Oregon State, pretty much the same pay. Oregon State, we looked at a house that, there was a 2-acre, real nice house that was available for, I think, $17,000. And in Hawaii, the same house would be about $110,000. And milk in Oregon State was about $1.35 a gallon, and milk in Hawaii was about $4 a gallon. So it was, and Oregon State is a very high level, well-known university, whereas Hawaiiloa is a little church-funded school that was about ready to fail. So the obvious choice was Oregon State, but it wasn't in Hawaii. And we were sitting there in the dining commons, waiting for the meal to be served. We were there early, and as people walked in, I noticed something a little strange about it. There was something strange. It just felt like we took a trip to Rose Island one time for the Smithsonian Institution. We drove out to a little atoll that's east of Samoa, and we landed there, and I looked at the foliage there, and I thought, something strange about it. And the botanist with us told me what was strange. What was strange was there's only one kind of plant there. Just one kind of plant. It was all the same thing. And I had that same feeling with the people walking into the dining commons. They were all pale complected. They all had blue blazers. They all wore ties. They all had shoes on. And I thought, I do not feel comfortable in this environment. I'm used to having people of all sorts of different colors and all sorts of different kind of, so.
Barefooted.
Yeah, so that's how we ended up going to Hawaii. And haven't regretted it, although it's too bad having to see you guys only once a year, but maybe we get along better that way. And we can get you guys to come visit us. Oh, Mark's got the picture of the muskie.
The head on the wall is the size of the fish beside it. That's from Little Blue River, that's.
Go under. And so we applied for jobs with the University of Hawaii and got jobs there at the community college, Kapiolani Community College. We had bought our house by that time. Got a good buy on the house. It was only $170,000. But when we tried to buy it, we couldn't qualify for it because our pay wasn't high enough. It was almost high enough, but not quite high enough. So since that happens a lot there, they have a deal that they call agreement of sale. If you want to buy something but you don't have the money yet, you can make an agreement of sale. So they agree to sell it to you, but meanwhile you pay what's equivalent to rent while you're waiting. So our next contract put us up over where we could qualify for the loan. So then we bought the house. And the house is now appraised, I'm not trying to brag or anything, just talking about how expensive things are there. Our house is now appraised for pretty close to 900,000, which here would be a house worth maybe 35,000. I don't know. I don't know what prices are around here anymore, but it's, Mark, what's your house worth? I don't mean to be personal
When you
question.
talk to the states for taxes, it's about 170. I would sell it for less than 225.
No, I'd say Mark's house is probably worth more than our house, absolute value. But anyway, it's a very expensive place. There is some cheap property over there now on the Big Island, in the southeast part of the Big Island.
That's view too, right? That view is the lava.
Yeah, some of it, you're gonna have to wait for it to cool before you can build on it, but,
And for it to turn into dirt and
Right.
grow, plant the coconut trees.
yeah, but living in Hawaii has its advantages. We have earthquakes and tsunamis and volcanoes and all sorts of interesting stuff to keep us on our toes.
And being a weatherman, you really enjoy that, right?
I don't mind it at all. And I don't mind when it gets cold there, oh my goodness, it'll sometimes get down into the 50s.
Oh, my God.
That's hard to take. I used to tell my students there that, water freezes here at 50. When it gets down to 50, water freezes. They say, oh, how do you know that? I said, well, I don't know, it never gets to 50, so you no way to prove it.
We'll talk about your music.
Music. Mike and I agree that we learned music from Martha Jane.
From who?
Martha Jane.
Not Sarah Beth?
Martha Jane made us, well, me anyway, made me perform in church.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Sure.
She would, when I was 3 years old, I was standing up there in the Christmas pageant and not knowing what I was supposed to do and feeling lost. But she was responsible, at least for my
Yeah.
singing, my interest in singing, because she was young at that time. She was a teenager, just barely post-teen. But always since then we've sung. We had a quartet that we sang with. When any place I've been, I've searched out. When we were in Florida, we sang with the community chorus group. In Hawaii, Ann and I both sing with the symphony chorus. A couple of times a year, we sit back with 60 or 80 singers and 60 or 80 instruments in front of us and a couple of thousand people out in the thing and sing something by Bach or Beethoven or...
You've done madrigals, haven't you?
Again?
You've done madrigals?
Done madrigals. We did madrigals just for fun. In Samoa, we had... Actually, it was funny. We were having a faculty talent show. And a new couple were there, Kim and Connie Marvel, and their trick was to sing a madrigal. And we got with them later on and said, oh, you guys are madrigal singers, we like to sing. So we got together and we would get, just the four of us would get together and sing madrigals. And we gave plays, we did Sound of Music, we did 8 performances of Sound of Music. I was the father in Sound of Music. We did Fantastics. I was one of the fathers in Fantastics. They kind of had me in I was always a father in something. And Fantastics international, because we went over to Western Samoa and performed. International experience. That was pretty good.
John, did you enter the Crawford County Talent Contest at the English Theater?
And I won 10 silver dollars.
Okay.
Don't I wish I still had those silver dollars? And I won it by ruse. Because Ferris Mock he had the instrument there to measure the applause meter. And Bill he was my main competitor. He had the restaurant there.
Bill Shields?
Bill Shields. And so when we came out, everybody would applaud for me, And then I'd sit down and Bill Shields would come. Everybody would applaud for him. And they did it again, and Ferris Muck finally announced that I was the winner. And later on, Ferris admitted both of us pegged the thing. He had no idea, but he was a friend with Dad instead of Bill Shields, so I got the nerve. I was so unhappy about that later on. I felt so guilty about that. I told Bill Shields about that years later, many years later. In fact, one of our au pair, what was her name, Miller? Anyway, one of mother had girls that would live with us and take care of us, so she didn't have so much work to do with only 7 kids. Why she'd have any work to do? But this lady was living up close to where Bill Shields lived, up on Needmore Hill, and she came in and we visited a little bit. But I told Bill at that time, that's not very long ago. He took it well. I didn't offer to give him any of the silver dollars back then.
You could have split it.
What's that?
You could have split it.
Could have, yeah. If I'd been honest, I would. Of course, the money wouldn't, $5 wouldn't have been anything, but $5 silver would have been good if I'd had them to give to him. But I frittered those away. I have no idea what happened to them.
I'm not sure what you covered while I was away, but sounds like folks were kind of pitching in with questions. I was
Yeah,
going to throw out there to think if you have any one
Carol
question.
was helping out a good bit there.
Very good. Did you talk back about sort of who your parents
Yeah,
are and
went-
family histories?
Well, not too much detail. I'm not sure that I want to go into too much detail, but the Flanagans and the Thornberrys weren't especially close, and I don't think they were, especially the Thornberrys. I don't think they were particularly happy that Mother and Dad got married. But we had no place to live, so we were shuttled back and forth from the Flanagan grandparents to the Thornberry grandparents. For a while we lived with the Flanagans, and then we'd go out to Thornberrys. Thornberrys were a little tougher because they had no electricity. That was before Roosevelt put in the rural electricity system, so when it got dark, they'd light the lantern up just long enough to go to bed. But the Flanagans, there were a lot of Flanagans. We had a big, grandmother had at one point it was 12 grandchildren,
I don't remember.
whereas Granddad Thornberry only had us.
And you were the eldest grandchild.
And I was the
both
eldest in
sides.
either family, which everybody has suffered from my being the eldest, because I was spoiled, I was entitled, I had the right to do whatever I wanted to, and I must have been a real unpopular kid.
And he still is.
And I still am. I try to, because it's still there, right? But I try to hide, I try to cover it up. I try to not do it, but it's kind of natural just to expect Mark to do everything for me. Mark, where'd you get this big? Oh, can I have that? Mark's the greatest host. He handled, 45 people?
38, I think.
38
count.
people?
38 for my daughter's wedding.
38 people in his house, in and around his house. Stuffing people in corners in his camper and managing to keep track of who's where, who needs to be where.
And keep what I have left of my hair.
Parking,
All with a smile.
Oh, it's a smile. Well, I guess I was smiling.
parking 10 or 12 cars in a driveway that's designed for 3. But it all came off. Mark's daughters, his oldest daughter who just got married, stayed with us a couple of years ago out in Hawaii while she was doing an internship at the Hawaii State Hospital, Rehabilitation Hospital. Her degree's in occupational therapy.
Yeah.
So she was with us for a couple of months. And then Amy got an internship at Sea Life Park. Amy got her degree in biology and then got an internship at Sea Life Park because she's interested in marine science. And she started that on January 2nd, and she just finished. So she's been with us all that time.
5 months.
And what a delightful guest she and both of the girls have been. They're just so neat. Tribute to their parents' upbringing. It's all Mark's fault.
That's because I told them what I'd do to them if they weren't nice.
Well, I've got an old pickup truck that Amy drives. So she drives every day from the house out to Sea Life Park through all that horrible Hawaii traffic and back in the evening. But twice a day, twice a week, she has to be on duty at 6.
Had to.
Had to,
Yeah.
not anymore. She had to be on duty at 6, so she'd be up early and she'd leave the house about 5:15. And other days, she only had to be there at 8:30. Then on Thursdays, she would work, they had a luau there where they would entertain tourists and have the pig and the fire knife dancing and all that kind of stuff. And she would had some kind of a part in that. I'm not sure what it was. So she'd be home late. So on Thursday, she'd be there at 6 in the morning and stay there until 8:30 or so. And some days we'd never even see her on Tuesday because we had chorus practice on Tuesday night, and she'd be working. She'd be getting up early the next morning, so we wouldn't see her Tuesday night because we'd leave before she got home from work, and then she'd leave before we got up. So, but it has worked out very, very well. She's been a great help.
I was gonna ask you about interesting camping trips you had. Remember that old VW bus you
Oh
had that
my
you
goodness,
turned
our
into a
VW buses.
camper?
We had a whole series of VW buses that we'd go camping with. Take the kids, however many kids we had at the time, and tour the West. Go out, stop off at state parks, and go down through Texas. Drive through Texas as fast as you can because there's nothing interesting in Texas.
No, nothing very interesting at all. That's why I'm up here.
We got down into Texas one time, and there was a big bunch of tornadoes that went through. And we were debating whether we ought to drive back in case there was so much damage. That's when Brandenburg was wiped out, and what was that city in Ohio that was torn up? It was really bad. But we decided by the time we got back we wouldn't be any use, so we went ahead. Often took Ann's young sister and brother along with us. And we were stopped at Dinosaur National Park, and the kids were running around. This was in the evening, and the kids were out. Well, the young boy was chasing around. He finally came back and he said, "Oh, I found Mr. So-and-so over here, one of his teachers at Burris School from Muncie." And sure enough, there was his teacher. It was right there in the National Park, which was kind of fun.
Did your interest in national parks stem from growing up around Marengo and
Oh,
Wyandotte
well, sure.
Caves and-
Growing up in the hill country with trees and caves and streams and all that kind of stuff around was a major part of making me who I am now and the things that I'm interested in. And once I got close to the ocean, that just extended it into the sea life part of things. So I got to be in Samoa, I got to be fairly expert at certain things. It's kind of easy to be an expert when there's no other experts around. So you learn more than anybody else knows, and suddenly you're an expert. But I would do, one of the things I had to learn in teaching scuba diving, there's a lot of stuff that's dangerous in the water, things that you can get hurt at. And so I got real good at that. And one of the doctors was one of my scuba students, and he said, "Well, you ought to come out and give us lectures." So every time they get new doctors to come in, they'd call me out, and I'd give a lecture on poisonous and venomous marine animals, and give them different shells that were poisonous that could kill you if you got stuck, and pictures of the stonefish and descriptions of the kind of medical care that they would need to provide for somebody that got that. So that worked pretty well. I finally wrote a little book. I never did publish it, but I wrote a book about the poisonous and venomous things. They've got a copy of that at the library at the hospital that they used for years. I don't know if they still do. It's probably been superseded by now. But we took another trip down there back in '86, I guess. And they were still using it then. In fact, when I was introduced, they said, "Oh, you're the one that wrote that." "Oh, yeah. Oh, well, that's on the wall right there in the emergency room." "Okay, that's cool."
You mentioned '86, I think that's around the time Halley's Comet came through. I don't know if you
Mike
talked about
Mike
your
came
love
Mike
for the
came
stars.
Mike came up to see us in Hawaii in '86. So it could have been '86. Had to be earlier than that. But it was not a good apparition of Halley's.
No.
It was, and plus it was cloudy all the time. So the night it was supposed to be best, we drove out to the beach where it was.
Diamond Head?
No, the beach where all the bikinis are.
Waikiki.
No,
No?
I don't go there often, so I don't remember. But anyway, we parked there on the sand and clouds. So I would stand watch, and Mike would sit in the car and nod. And if it came view, I'd knock on the window and he'd come out and we'd get 10 seconds of view of it. And it was not a good. I got a good view of it on its way in, when it was farther away. But I was doing a consultancy down in Truck, and I was staying at the hotel in Truck, and it was nice, clean sky, and I could see Halley's very well, although it was small, it was at a great distance. And I thought, well, I don't have to worry about that. I've got it coming. When it comes around the sun, it's going to be close to the Earth and be easier to see. It came around to the Earth, close to the sun, but it was positioned in such a way that the tail was right straight at us, so you couldn't see anything but just this ordinary blob of stuff, and we could only see that between clouds anyway. So it wasn't a very exciting time.
Unlike last summer with the solar
Unlike last
eclipse.
summer with the eclipse, yeah, that was our latest, before this time, our latest family gathering. We had about 26 people there, 22 of them Flanagans or something like that. That was a good trip. I got a lot of good video pictures of that.
The year before was the reopening of
The year
Wyandotte
before was the
Cave.
reopening of Wyandotte Cave, which I was happy to go to. And that caused me to reinstate my National Speleological Society membership. I wrote to them and said, "Can I get my original number?" And they looked in the data, and they found these old records and said, "Oh yeah, here it is, number 1987. So I've got NSS number 1987. The latest number is in the 20,000s. So I wanted to preserve that. I'll probably never use it for anything, but I've got a card that says NSS member number 1987.
Any other memories of English with the other folks who grew up here? Anything else come to mind that you want to bring up or ask about?
I was thinking one time when we was talking about the fire whistle blowing, that was one of our major entertainments, was when there was a fire. The fire whistle would go off, we'd grab the phone, and Verda would tell us where we were, where the fire was. We'd hang it up and we'd take off running. I remember a couple of times out at the lumberyard. It's pretty spectacular fires at the lumberyard. Go out there, and boy, I'd run all the way from the house out to the lumberyard, and my chest would be painful. I'd be heaving. And it was in the winter time. It was cold air I was breathing in. And I stood up there on the bank and made snowballs, and threw snowballs at the fire. It didn't do any good.